And when I woke up this morning, I thought it was Friday, and then I was like, I've missed a video, and then I realized it was Thursday, and I'm right on time. 2 chapters today. That would be Mad-Eye Moody and The Unforgivable Curses. And I think the best way to handle this is in 2 parts. Because, as always, the chapter heading does not denote what the entire chapter is about. That would be really difficult to do. So, while we get a focus on Mad-Eye Moody's Defense Against the Dark Arts class, we get some other classes. We get the beginning of Spew, which I think I'm going to talk about a little later once we have a bit more understanding of it and its results and complications. Part 1, though, is actually our continuing attempt to understand divination. Because the divination that's actually presented to us in these 2 chapters is actually surprisingly accurate for probably being faked. We get Trelawney yet again poking at Harry, as always. At first we seem to get this really general thing about that thing that you're regretting is going to happen, which is a repeat of last book's thing to Lavender, of the thing that you are dreading is going to happen. But is, again, surprisingly accurate, because probably what Harry's dreading very deep down is the return of Voldemort, which happens in this book. We have the students, most notably Ron and Harry here, faking their own predictions. The idea of, oh, just put in a lot of pain and sorrow and she'll lap it right up. So, give me a second. Doop, 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 doop. The dates are wrong, but the events surprisingly accurate. Okay. Harry says, Monday I'll be in danger of burns. Dragon. Tuesday, they sort of, it's interesting because they coalesce everything. Because it's then for Ron, Tuesday, he'll lose a treasured possession. But that's actually, you know, Harry in the second task. Or possibly Ron in regards to Harry's friendship, because we will then get stabbed in the back by somebody you thought was a friend, which could point to both of them, again, in the anger that we're going to see over the Triwizard Tournament. Ron perceiving it as a betrayal because Harry didn't share his knowledge, Harry seeing it as a betrayal because Ron doesn't believe him that he didn't enter. Wednesday I think I'll come off worse in a fight, which is the end of the third task, and Harry getting caught and tortured and used in a ceremony against his will, which is pretty straight up. Yeah, that's coming off worse in a fight. And then Ron says one that I haven't quite figured out yet. because I'm not actually sure where it sits in all of this. Ron said, oh, I was going to do a fight. Okay, I'll lose a bet. Yeah, you'll be betting I'll win my fight. So that one we want to try and see if we can track down. But everything else we're actually seeing here is slotted in quite nicely with what's actually going to happen. Even the little things, like when Hermione reads over it, she points out that Ron has drowning down twice. And Ron changes one of them to getting crushed by a herd of hippogriffs, I think. But hey, actually, Ron is the treasured possession that ends up in the lake. So drowning on that one isn't actually that far off. So the question then becomes, how self-fulfilling are these things in? I doubt they're keeping these in mind going forward. I really don't think that, like, when Harry's name comes out of the cup, Ron's thinking, I'm going to be mad at him now because he stabbed me in the back because we made those predictions. I don't think that's the thought process that's actually happening, but they do seem to have this intimate connection that they think they're faking. And sure, they might be faking the reasons for it. They got things down here like, because Venus is in the 12th house. Oh, Ron starts with a cough because of an unlucky conjunction of Mars and Jupiter. So, like, they certainly seem to be faking the reasons for it, but it's a question of, is there an innate understanding of what's happening in the world that they're actually able to have these strings of knowledge that they're able to follow without going into a full trance? Trelawney actually seems to. That might be odd to say, but she's actually onto something. So when they start first talking about planetary alignment and the planets you're born under, Harry sort of dozes off. Ron wakes him up. Trelawney's looking at him. I was saying, my dear, that you are clearly born under a baleful influence of Saturn. Saturn, dear, the planet Saturn. I was saying that Saturn was surely in a position of power in the heavens at the moment of your birth. Your dark hair, your mean stature, tragic losses, so young in life. I think I'm right in saying, my dear, that you were born in midwinter. And Harry, of course, says, no, I was born in July, and then we all laugh. Trelawney isn't picking up on Harry on that one. She's picking up on Tom Riddle, who was born at the New Year, midwinter, who had dark hair and a mean stature and tragic losses in his young life. Like, she gets it. But she doesn't realize how much she does. Just like with the actual prediction, which she completely brushed off, she's making this with some sort of knowledge that she cannot accurately explain. She's certainly not thinking, hey, there's a piece of another person's soul in your scar, and that's what I'm reading from. No, she's very directly reading from something else, but enough of it matches to Harry that we laugh her off. Dark hair, shorter, tragic losses early in life. We want to look at her like she's faking it. Yet, oddly enough, she's actually very good at understanding things, including the parallels that can be drawn between Harry and Tom Riddle. We're seeing that two sides of the same coin thing, with one being born midsummer and the other midwinter. The question is that enough to make a difference? Because, again, with the fact that we are seeing not only full prophecies having an effect, but even the fake prophecies actually coming in, there has to be more to this style of divination than we are allowing for. There has to be some understanding that's actually coming through divination that is affecting the world. And I think it's really cool. Okay. Part 2. Mad Eye. Who's not Mad Eye? But it's actually Barty Crouch Jr., who I will call Barty, because Barty Crouch Jr. is a mouthful. Oh, Moody Barty. This set of chapters is just a mess when it comes to this dude. Especially when we're reading it, we know he is not in fact a world famous Auror, and is in fact a Death Eater. Because the thing is, we have a divide with Barty's actions in this chapter as Moody, and how right those choices are. That is to say that Moody has a tendency to recognize that you sometimes need action over just explanation. Like, you need to be faced with the thing before anything's going to happen that's going to be useful. And this starts with punishment of Malfoy, in the form of being a weasel and bouncing all over the place. And when I did some research on the unforgivable curses to try and get as much information in canon that I can, there was a point where it was put forward that the bouncing that Moody makes Malfoy do may be under the Imperious curse. So there's that possibility straight up right there. But even if the unforgivable is not involved, there is the question of how allowable is this? For example, Snape has a tendency to have punishments that are a lot like this, like really nasty and gross for the person that has to do it, and sometimes probably pretty painful too. And we're supposed to go against Snape on that one. Yet, I think with the fabulous bouncing ferret, a lot of us want to go with Moody on this one. Because Draco can't learn to take it as well as he can give it. I don't like Draco, particularly in this one. Like, Harry just stepped up and handed it back to Draco, and Draco's answer is to curse him when his back's turned. Also, Harry, don't turn your back. Don't turn your back. But does that necessarily mean that I should be okay with him being humiliated and probably hurt, considering the distance that he's actually flying up and landing? No. I don't think just because we don't like Draco that we should be okay with this. Just like I don't think we should dislike Snape and be okay with his punishments. And then it gets even more complicated, because we are suddenly then put into this classroom with the unforgivable curses being the first thing that's actually taught. And it becomes a question then of how morally understandable was this lesson. By that I mean, we certainly get some good arguments for it by Moody about needing to see what we're actually going to be fighting. Which, at this point in time, we've been following the Golden Trio. We know that a war is coming. Maybe even if other people don't, which is exactly what Sirius says in the end of chapter letter. But the question is, are they really at an age where they can understand it? Because we actually see two students that take it really badly because they were subjugated to that knowledge a lot sooner than their 4th year. And that, of course, is Harry now knowing exactly how his parents were killed and why he keeps seeing a green light. And Neville, who, having read the series and come back to it, we know full well, witnessed his parents being tortured by the Cruciatus curse. And how that must straight up affect him. So, is the knowledge worth it? Is always a question that comes up in moral philosophy. Are the ends worth the means? Is having a class that can now start recognizing the curses that are coming at them worth the trauma that 2 students have to go through? And not even just 2 students. You just killed a living being and tortured another one in front of these students. That's going to have some sort of effect on them that we have to be aware of. But is them being prepared in the long run worth the trauma in the short term? And I'm not sure any of us can make that call. I think a lot of us would probably be more comfortable if it was Moody and not a Death Eater. But we can no longer have that comfort. But that goes for the other side too. The fact that Barty talks to Neville about what happened to his parents and lets Neville vent, apparently, is incredibly touching, particularly since Barty Jr. was put in Azkaban for the Longbottom attacks. He was the 4th person there, along with the Lestranges. So what about Neville made Barty decide, I can't leave it like this? I mean, Neville isn't perfectly fine after that. Harry notices that he's awake too. And the 2 of them are sitting there, wondering if the world's suddenly changing. Now that everybody else knows exactly what they've known, and that they know more about it. This is actually a deeply uncomfortable position we're sitting in on 2 moral levels. I mean, the first level, again, is what we've stated before. How morally sound is it to be showing these kids the unforgivable curses? Is it better that they're prepared? And that we teach them what they need to know so that they can be prepared? most people obviously are going to say yes to that if it was anything else. But since the unforgivable curses at this point in time in the series are illegal, can we justify it? But the other moral level that we need to question is how we're looking at Barty Crouch Jr. Every person has their good points and their flaws. So, morally, if Barty is a good teacher, particularly when he takes care to make sure that he hasn't traumatized Neville or Harry too much, does that affect the rest of his actions? Do we judge him on his poor decisions more than on his good choices? He's still a human, and that's at least something we need to acknowledge here, which means we also have to acknowledge it with the other Death Eaters. Everyone has flaws, but we have to question why they're making these choices. Especially since we do see that they're not robots. They're not under the Imperius for the most part, so why are they doing this? Which I don't think is the easiest question to ask for either of these questions. Okay, so that's that for this week. I'm sorry it's more questions than answers, and I'm a little curious of what your opinions on these moral quandaries actually are. Philosophically, can we make these decisions, or are we sort of stuck in an area of gray? Questions we have to consider, I guess. Okay, so next week we're getting into some other schools coming, and this is going to be interesting. So until then, I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you do too. Bye!